I'm James O'Keefe. On this episode of OMG Exclusive with James O'Keefe, I sit down and talk with controversial Blackwater founder and great American Erik Prince about the woke culture that is overtaking top levels of the American government, including the military.
There's the moral courage of leaders to commit their people to an uncertain outcome. Where's the moral courage of those supposedly good agents to call bullshit on the rest of their organization? That's where they need to grow a pair.
The overreach of the Department of Justice and the bureaucratic state's weaponization of the government against its critics.
Instead of the FBI chasing actual counterintelligence risks, they're chasing
me.
They're chasing you, or they're harassing me, or they're chasing people that pray outside of abortion clinics, and it's wrong.
A random drop of Erik Prince's name during our undercover investigation looking into the woke policies at the Pentagon.
The Erik Prince.
He's your least favorite person. Wow.
One of them.
I'm proud of who my enemies are.
And the shocking invasion of your privacy on your smartphone.
Your Google or your Apple phone is built to collect, harvest, and sell all of your personal data. How frightening is that? That your phone is listening to your dialogue with your spouse. What else is your phone listening to?
And how Erik Prince is combating that by rolling out a new breed of smartphone that protects you and your privacy.
Our phone, with our operating system, prevents that kind of collection because this is actually, it's the first phone with a hard-off firewall settings.
This is OMG Exclusive with James O'Keefe. Not a week goes by without a news headline about potential medical supply shortages, threats to our infrastructure or power grid. And you remember what they pulled during the last pandemic. Certain medications were mysteriously out of stock. No way will I ever let that happen again. In today's unpredictable world, it's all about being prepared for who knows what they have in store for the next pandemic. Our friends and supporters at the Wellness Company have designed this unique, prescription-based medical emergency kit that is packed with 8 potentially life-saving prescription-only medications, including Z-Pak and ivermectin, which I used myself while out on the road and starting to feel a bit under the weather. Health is everything. And this is a great opportunity to order a Wellness Company Medical Emergency Kit. The Wellness Company Medical Emergency Kit stands ready to treat over 30 common ailments, ensuring you'll have access to vital medications when you need them most. And now save $45 per kit when you order using the code OMG. Get ready to write this down. Get your Wellness Company Medical Emergency Kit at twc.health/OMG. That's twc.health/OMG. That's twc.health/OMG. And save $45 per kit today when you use code OMG. Well, Erik Prince, this is really serendipitous, pretty wild, because this guy, Jason Beck, Associate Director, Total Force Requirements and Sourcing Policy in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, not exactly a low-level guy, he mentions you by name in the meeting with me. I'm just going to play this clip to refresh what he said about you, and we'll talk about some of the quotes I didn't even include in this 25-minute long video. Get your reaction.
Erik Prince, he was the leader of Blackwater. They rebranded after the scandal. He's actually Betsy DeVos's brother.
Wow.
She's terrible, and he's worse. He's like one of my least favorite people in the world.
Who?
This guy, the Erik Prince.
He's your least favorite person. Wow.
Well, one of them. He really grinds my gears, because it's such an immoral thing to do. And he's just out there doing it and making so much money, and there's no accountability for any bad things that they've done. Because he runs companies of mercenaries, and they go out and they do bad things, you know, and he's very pro-mercenary, right? Why wouldn't he be? That's what he does.
So what are you doing to prevent this from happening again?
I mean, I'm trying to get policies in place that make it more difficult to use them and establish standards in compliance with international standards about like the type of companies that can do this and like the certifications that they have to have in order to be considered, you know, like on the up and up, that sort of thing.
Okay, now here I'm sitting with you. So much to unpack your initial reaction.
proud of who my enemies are. If this is what, if this is the kind of people that are helping set policy at the Pentagon, it speaks to why the Pentagon has been so ineffective at finishing wars and deterring our enemies.
And he's talking about, I guess, contractors, and he says also in this tape, you know, he likes a big government. He thinks the government does it better. Just speak for a minute about your reaction to that. Do you agree with that, disagree with that? Why?
I sold that old business in 2010, 14 years ago. So for him to still be hating on me as a government contractor, it speaks to why the bureaucracy hated us back then, and I guess why they still hate us today, is because Blackwater represented a better, different, faster, more efficient way of doing things, of accomplishing what some would consider was an inherently governmental function that only the government could do. But if we could do it in security or in training or logistics or aviation support in weird places and do it better, cheaper, faster than the government, any bureaucracy loves to protect itself. And the fact that he still has Blackwater and me as the boogeyman, it speaks to most existing government contractors are part of the problem, not part of the solution, because no one is really trying to change the paradigm and make the Pentagon and our national security more effective.
So it's self-preservation for them. They want to protect their money, protect their power, effectively what you're saying.
It's the swamp, protecting the swamp.
Some of the other quotes here, by the way, he's 38 years old. You said 14 years ago?
Yeah, sold it in 2010.
So he was 23, 24 years old when you left there, and you're still inside their heads.
Yeah, it speaks to the the existing beltway paradigm of big defense. You've had 100 defense contractors over the last 25 years consolidate down to about 5. And none of those are really focused on making the dollar go farther and lethality better. And they've all been caught up in the entire DEI woke nonsense, which is why the United States can't even effectively, the weapon system's not even effective, or they can't even keep up with the demands of a Ukraine war, let alone deterring our enemies elsewhere in the world. I mean, the fact that the Navy is shooting $2 million missiles to knock down a $20,000 drone launched by the Houthis, it's an unsustainable problem, and it's why we need to do a hell of a lot better job of defense reform.
Why 100 down to just a few? What is the cause of that?
That was a push of consolidation that started during the Clinton administration. And big money chases out and buys out the smaller businesses. The way the Pentagon, the way this clown drives defense policy is to default towards the super big ones. Remember, the super big defense contractors basically have laid siege to Washington with multiple thousands of lobbyists. So the Pentagon spends too much money on those defense contractors, who then pay lobbyists to pay politicians to keep the cycle going. And it's a very unvirtuous cycle.
So this guy in the Pentagon, he's actually rewarding larger contractors?
They default towards the Lockheed, the Northrop, the Boeings, the Raytheons, the SAICs. I mean, the Secretary of Defense now was a board member of Raytheon. The previous chairman of the Joint Chiefs joined the board of Lockheed immediately after retiring. So yes, the big Pentagon guys reward the senior generals for perpetuating the same bad habits that we're in now.
You would think he would dislike those people, since they're the big time, I mean, the Goldman Sachs of the financial world, the Raytheon of the military defense. So the loathing towards you. I don't fully understand it. They loathe me too.
Because I had the courage or the spine to challenge the paradigm, to say, hey, we can do this better. Early on, I said we want to be what FedEx was to the Postal Service. FedEx still exists. The Postal Service still exists. The Postal Service is a little better now, because FedEx or UPS were chomping at their heels and competing. Look, any defense contractor should want to outcompete and do better and provide a better good or solution, because in the private world, that's how you actually survive. Mm-hmm. But in Washington, just showing up and paying politicians apparently has become more important than actually providing a valuable good or service.
So you were a disruptor in a way?
Yes.
And he doesn't like that.
Particularly since the country was at war in 2 theaters, in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we woke up trying to serve the government's needs, whether it's security or training or logistics or aviation support, not doing offensive combat operations, put those support functions and to do it better, cheaper, and a competitively bid, right? So the other really bad habit of the super major defense firms is they love cost plus, because they get to and it incentivizes them to add more, to make everything cost more so they can add a fee on top of it. We preferred to bid firm fixed price, where we'd say, just like if you have someone build a house for you, you don't say, well, build a house with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and tell me what it's going to cost at the end. No, you have them bid, and that way it incentivizes the vendor to drive costs down and be efficient. But that's the opposite of what the Big Five do in Washington.
Here are some other quotes that we don't have the video of this, but these will be exclusively new. This guy said so much stuff, and I want to get to what he talks about with this monopoly on violence, and I want to get into this philosophy and the history of some of what you specialize in. But he says, he brings up Blackwater a few times, and he said there's a whole industry of those types of companies. He talks about the government is supposed to do it, not these contractors, and he says, quote, the stuff that we're supposed to reserve to government. And he does talk to me a little bit about just eliminating entirely these contractors. He thinks the government can do it better. This guy doesn't strike me as a stupid person. I mean, he's well-spoken, he's thoughtful. We can get to that in a minute. And he thinks the government should do all of it. There shouldn't be any civilians working on these projects. Your reaction to that?
I'd say that's a very socialist, the ultimate big government perspective. And what made America was lots of private sector initiative and innovation that made it possible for America to be what it is now. When you think about the American West, it was not settled and pacified by the U.S. Army. It was actually settled and pacified by the Pinkerton Detective Agency, which in the late 1800s had about 8 times the amount of armed agents as the U.S. Army did. So when banks or the Pony Express or railways had huge problems with crime, they called the Pinkertons. They didn't call the U.S. Army into that gap. I was born in the summer of 1969, the summer of Woodstock and Apollo 11. And if you'd said 50 years later, the only way the U.S. was to get to the space station was on a Russian rocket or a contractor rocket, they would have laughed you out of Johnson Space Center. But that's the reality. So this idea of what is inherently governmental or not, that guy is about 5 decades behind.
He also works in the office of the Secretary of Defense. He actually works for the Undersecretary, but he's talking about Lloyd Austin here. Your thoughts on the Secretary of Defense generally?
Look, the Pentagon is in dire need of reform. I don't think that Secretary Austin has done any kind of reform to make it more lethal, more efficient, and more fearsome to our enemies. And the drop in recruiting is American civilians voting to say, we're not so confident in the way this military is led, and there's some different ways that we should do things.
He mentions the word mercenary a few times. I mean, are you a mercenary?
That's the thing. The left love to use that pejorative term. People love to say, we love veterans, but they hate contractors. In our case, in Blackwater's case, we had American veterans that had already volunteered to serve the country once, that were volunteering to go back again. And even under the Oxford Dictionary definition of mercenary, a mercenary is someone that serves in a foreign war for a country not their own. So in our case, we were Americans working for the State Department or for other parts of the U.S. government in an overseas operation. So it doesn't even meet the definition of mercenary. But look, the left in the Vietnam War loved to go after troops. Now they like to go after contractors. The left is not really in favor of having a credible deterrent capability, and they certainly have a government-only approach that the government wants to be the sole purveyor of force or credibility, which is directly contradicts the actual Second Amendment. Because it's wonderful to have a First Amendment where you can say freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, backed immediately by the Second Amendment. Because, as I like to say to my kids, God created man, but Samuel Colt made them equal. Okay? And armed citizenry is the ultimate check on runaway government power. And clearly that guy wants runaway government power unchecked by free and armed civilians.
Let's listen to this part about monopoly on state violence, which, according to Britannica, is a concept that the state alone has the right to use or authorize the use of physical force. Beck describes it as, quote, "We, the government, are the only ones with guns."
I would like to do some work on the state's monopoly on violence.
On the what?
The state's monopoly on violence.
State's monopoly. What is that?
It's the idea that the state, meaning the country, is the only sort of legitimate purveyor of violence and coercive force. We're the only ones with guns, right?
Going back to your topic, it's like the state should be the only one.
Let me just pause it there. So, state monopoly on violence. Have you heard of this before?
Yeah, that sounds like it comes right from the Communist Party of China's edict that they are the sole purveyor of force. It is antithetical to a constitutional republic that we live under now.
So do you think that this guy is fired from the Pentagon or promoted?
I wouldn't say that they won't fire him for this because
They won't fire him.
because they believe.
They believe this.
This is what the Pentagon leadership believes.
They just won't say it out loud or say it publicly.
You got him in a moment of candor to say it out loud.
Right. It is interesting what actually the latest strategy from the subjects that I investigate is there's no reaction at all. And in years past, they'd be fired. There'd be reaction. We don't know what happens to them, or if they're alive or dead or perp walked out of the Pentagon. We just don't know. But your speculation is he's just saying what they all believe to be true.
Yeah. We have a real constitutional crisis in America because we're supposed to have 3 branches of government, but the reality is we have 4. We have an unelected, unaccountable bureaucracy that is perpetually funded, overfunded, and it must be changed. And so, if we're going to have a constitutional republic, this kind of elections have to have consequences. You have to actually be able to affect the course of what the bureaucracy is doing. No one can do that now.
Because this guy is part of, as you point out, the administrative state. He's not elected. He still has a job if Donald Trump is elected, theoretically. And this, like many of the people I've spoken to, the government, they're there regardless of who wins. What do you think the solution is to that?
And if you can't fire someone that's supposed to be working for you, they aren't actually working for you. You're working for them. And so this must change. And so there needs to be a fundamental reform of civil service rules so that wholesale bureaucracies can be culled or removed, because if you have an election, let there be consequences. Even if you have to go back to the old spoil system where the party that wins the election staffs the government fully.
Mm-hmm. And the civil service reform would be done by Congress, or is that
yes?
We have to be congressional.
Look, there's a lot of things that can be implemented. I think the Trump team has identified some angles that they can affect it, but it also needs there's a congressional process that needs to be done, and we need elected representatives to fix it, because this is not what America is supposed to be.
Let's talk about how he believes that we can implement this state monopoly on violence and remove everyone's firearms.
That has access to these sorts of firearms, essentially.
Yeah.
Jason Beck, Associate Director, Total Force Requirements and Sourcing Policy from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, says that, quote, "We, the government, should repeal the Second Amendment and take all the guns away," unquote.
Man, they always shout Second Amendment, Second Amendment.
I think we should repeal it and take them all away. Whatever, just take them all. Gosh, there's so many things that you could do.
On guns, particularly, would just be repeal it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we have a need for it.
Jason Beck says you just have to take the guns, up to and including mobilization of the National Guard.
How do we deal with these crazy people, though, that they don't want to give them up?
You have to take them.
So what would be like a federal solution?
But I wonder if you would see a similar solution to like school integration.
Yeah.
Where they did have to mobilize the National Guard. How many people in the National Guard, maybe were personally opposed to integration, but still followed orders and made it happen?
It's interesting he says follows orders. I think, I've known you for a number of years, but we are getting to a point in space and time when people have a conscience, and I had a whole conversation with this person, Jason Beck, about this, and he said that local sheriffs and police would not abide by an order to remove guns.
Nope.
Your thoughts on that?
Just following orders was a bogus excuse used at Nuremberg by Nazis that were on trial. I think it's incumbent on every person that's in a position of responsibility in the United States to not just follow orders blindly. And if orders like that are to go and seize people's guns, of course, there's going to be significant consequences, because a lot of people take their rights as free citizens to speech and assembly and to worship and to protect their families very seriously, deadly seriously. And so for a clown like this to be spouting off from a position of some kind of responsibility at the Pentagon is exceedingly dangerous. And it also speaks to, this is what the paradigm of Washington is, and it is not what the rest of America is.
So that's the spirit, the soul, the ethos. And where does that line, because you're a Navy SEAL, where is that line drawn between following your conscience or following a principle, perhaps a natural law, versus an order that's given that where is that line? That's something that I'm finding a lot in my journalism these days.
You know, when you join the military, you swear to not defend an administration or a president or a person. You swear to defend the Constitution. And the Founding Fathers were actually quite brilliant in writing a document to prescribe all the ways to fix this system within the system without resorting to violence. And it's actually something, even at Blackwater, unlike all the other contractors, when our people were deploying, they swore the same oath that they did when they joined the military. They weren't certainly swearing allegiance to me or the company or to a department. They swore allegiance to the Constitution. And I think it's very important for anybody that's in a position of policy or enforcement in the government to remember that they work effectively for a document. And the document represents the people. They don't represent the union or an administration or a political party. And if they keep going in that direction, there's going to be an irreparable breach.
I mean, in the unrelated to this, but in the border stuff I've been doing, there was this moment when they have these hotels filled with illegal immigrants, and the local county sheriff, much like what Beck is talking about here inside the Pentagon, he said, "I'm just following orders." I said, "You're protecting a bus filled with migrant children into this facility. You're just following orders." And his eyes were sort of glazed over, and he wasn't even thinking about the orders that he was following. Beck says that, well, the National Guard will come. I don't believe that the National Guard would probably follow that order. I don't.
No, because most of the kind of people that join the National Guard are not the kind that that have bottom surgery or are mentally ill, and they join to protect their communities, their families, and this republic. And so it's a very dangerous paradigm that Washington believes of itself.
Since you brought that up, I wrestled with whether or not to include this in the piece. We were divided on it, but ultimately I did think it was relevant, and I guess the reason why I thought it was relevant, from my perspective, everyone has their perspective, is if it's not something to be ashamed of, then it's fair game. But yeah, he says bottom surgery. I didn't even know what that meant.
I don't know either, and I don't even care to know.
No.
And I refuse to indulge someone's mental illness, and I don't think it helps them by indulging their mental illness.
Right.
And the fact that an entire industry has been created around cutting and sewing and trying to change somebody's gender, it doesn't actually change their gender. It just means a so-called medical professional took a lot of money from you and left you mentally damaged and physically scarred.
And is that relevant in the context of personnel in the Department of Defense in any way? What he's talking about here?
It does not. It speaks to how far the military's focus has gone from being extremely lethal and extremely efficient in delivering force. There should be the mission of the U.S. military is to be ready to destroy our enemies. Mm-hmm. Okay, and you do that first by deterrence, and if deterrence fails, to smash. And they clearly have lost the plot on that.
When I first met him, other than attacking you, the second thing he told me, he was walking with a cane, and he told me it was some type of procedure that went wrong. I thought he broke his bone in his leg. I wasn't quite sure, and then I pieced this together, and I realized this was a complication from this surgery. Certainly a distraction.
And now imagine if that was paid for by government insurance that the taxpayers have funded. Again, I'm sorry he has a mental illness, but that doesn't mean it has a place for in our national defense scheme.
The other thing that a lot of the comments said is, people think that, I'm in there doing all types of complicated espionage. Not really. I mean, he started talking about you. He started talking about his views on the border, open borders. He started saying this within minutes of me talking to him. This was not some complicated intelligence operation. So that leads me to believe that a spy or someone could compromise people pretty quickly. I'm assuming that happens.
It speaks to the volume of counterintelligence risk that exists around Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Of how easy it is to entice and to compromise people.
I'm actually shocked by that, how easy it is to, there's another guy a few weeks ago inside the White House, office of the Executive Office of the President, cybersecurity guy, some 35-year-old Harvard-educated man, similarly telling me about Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and all these secrets. I'm assuming you know that this happens in D.C. You're aware of this being a counterintelligence risk to the country. I'm shocked by that, as is the audience. Anything you want to say about that?
And sure, and instead of the FBI chasing actual counterintelligence risks, they're chasing
me.
They're chasing you, or they're harassing me, or they're chasing people that pray outside of abortion clinics. It's wrong, and it's abuse of federal power, and it is designed. It's a weaponization of what's supposed to be an impartial federal law enforcement, and it's wrong, and it absolutely requires change. And it must be changed to the ballot box, because if it goes beyond, if those kind of changes don't happen, then the republic as we know it will change very differently.
Yeah, you touched on two things there. The FBI, I want to talk to you about that. But when people think of the administrative state, the deep state, you sort of think of these shadowy Orwellian figures, square-jawed. Most of the deep state people I've interacted with are like this.
Yes.
Is that consistent with your understanding of the administrative state?
Yes, and worse, that when you give an asshole a gun and a badge, you get a bigger asshole. And so if you put the wrong people in positions of responsibility and authority, there's been all kinds of studies about people that are given almost unlimited, what they think is unlimited authority, and power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that Washington needs a haircut. It needs a scalping.
How to do that, maybe outside the scope of this interview?
Starts with money. Congress can just appropriate a lot less money. Okay, Congress should be the thalidomide. It's a drug that was wrongfully administered, but it leads to a constriction of blood flow. You dry this city up, you will heal it by cutting off money to these massive overloaded federal agencies.
And a lot of people upset at Republican members of Congress. Is it a lack of will, a lack of balls? Do they have blackmail on people? What is the reason why
I think it's a combination of all. You have some marginal people that run for Congress. They don't have the moral courage to say, no, this ends now and we're going to cut this sucker down. And I'm sure, as you were able to show easily, it's very easy to compromise people in Washington.
And you can just make stuff up about people too. You don't have to actually have real information about them.
Sure. And the loop of a reporter creating a completely false story which simulates a fishing expedition by federal law enforcement to find something, and then it becomes a cycle of attack, and they bleed that person whether they did anything wrong or not.
It's funny enough that we're sitting together. I think that the national security reporters at the New York Times, like Adam Goldman, Mark Mazzetti, I've actually confronted these people, have written a number of articles just with you and I in the same article.
Sure.
And the way they write these, as you know, it's not so much that they make up something that isn't so. They use hyperbole, innuendo. They take
2% truth and spin it into a story.
Right, and I'm actually impressed at the clever, deceitful way they do it. It's remarkable. It's very difficult for them to work in the visual realm because they have to use language in a way, they butcher the English language. And these national security reports in the New York Times, one of the things that happened to me is the FBI came to my home. I wanted to talk to you about this and get your thoughts on this, and with a battering ram to my door. And speaking of the administrative state, one of the FBI agents, to your point, was really, really short guy. I mean, probably 5 foot tall, you know, and trying to use all this bravado. But what I saw on the faces of those agents when they came to my home was I think half of them were like, this is crazy, we shouldn't be doing this. That's what I think. That's what I could see it. Now, you never quite know because they're kind of...
But where's the moral courage of those supposedly good agents to call bullshit on the rest of their organization? That's where that's where they need to grow a pair and force, be a whistleblower, or force their organizations to reform.
So you've been overseas. You've been shot at. Your people have been shot at. You fought you've done the physical courage thing, which I haven't been through. But you said this when I first met you in 2016. The first thing you said, and I think you were quoting or paraphrasing, was it von Clausewitz or somebody? But you said that moral courage is much more limited.
There's two kinds of courage to win a war: individual soldiers' courage to go take that hill and take that machine gun nest. We have a lot of that in America. But there's the moral courage of leaders to commit their people to an uncertain outcome. And we need the moral courage of leaders that are in the ranks that see that injustice and force change.
But why isn't there...
So those federal employees sitting through another coerced DEI lecture or whatever nonsense is being fed to them now, just to call bullshit on it.
But why isn't there that moral courage?
Because it's uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable, but it's also uncomfortable to be shot at.
Yes, but well, and not to diminish combat at all, but combat might last a few minutes.
Oh.
But the harassment and the pain that comes from moral courage in a career where you're possibly interrupting your income or your ability to advance in society, that has long-term implications. And so it's
harder.
It's all hard.
It's all hard.
But people need to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and because we kind of stand on the shoulders of giants. The founding fathers built a great country, built great wealth and security in a society, and it's kind of coming apart rapidly. And if we don't get this back together soon, it's gonna be very, very ugly. And civil wars and those kind of conflagrations never ends well, and you never end up above where you started in terms of organization, comfort, everything else. Look at what's become of Haiti. They've been free of colonial rule for 200 years, and they still haven't been able to get their stuff together. It's easy to break stuff. It's hard to build, and we're allowing the left. Imagine a turbine engine. It spins, powers thousands of aircraft a day. It has maybe 5 moving parts, and you keep throwing sand in those gears, and it'll spin for a while, and then eventually that turbine engine comes apart violently. And you can only throw so much sand in the gears of America until this thing comes apart badly.
Another Navy SEAL, Marcus Luttrell, said, I remember when he said this, I think it was like 7 years ago at the 2016 convention, he stood up and said, "Our war is here." That's what he said. And do you agree with that?
Yeah. Look, Ronald Reagan said the loss of freedom is never more than a generation away. And so we've inherited a great country, and our, the 70-year-olds to the 20-year-olds are screwing it up badly. So let's change course. And not just change course 10 degrees, 90 degrees, or 180 degrees.
The trauma from moral courage, it can be a shock to the system. Like when the FBI came to my home and I saw that occur, and I think the trauma is that it's the system of justice that attacks you. And maybe you could speak to some of what you've been through. I don't know if people fully understand, because you founded Blackwater. You're going after the most powerful. You're a disruptor to the most powerful thing in the world.
But never intended to do that. I literally started Blackwater as a way to stay connected to the SEAL teams, because I got out earlier than I planned to, and built a training facility which became more of a machine, and to serve what the government needed in overseas and domestic training and readiness. And we built the Are You Ready High School, I remember in 1999, after the Columbine shootings to try to teach SWAT officers how to solve an active shooter problem better. So never set out to be disruptive or transformational, just provide a better service. But man, seeing the way government does things in the most bloated, ineffective way, and I guess I've never been one to back down from a fight, and so I'm happy to call bullshit where I see it. And I've seen a lot of bullshit, and selling the business in 2014 has really made me unrestricted in my willingness or ability to see, because when I see what the Defense Department does, we've done, everything I recommended to Trump, trying to change policy in Afghanistan, to let the Pentagon go home, to rationalize down to 5% of what the spend was. None of that was theoretical for me, because we've done lots of training and mentoring and logistics and aviation support. And I knew it could be done cheaper, better, faster. And then when the Pentagon, like this clown, doesn't want anything to do with that, it speaks to the socialist hell that some countries live in. This guy wants the U.S. government to be like Venezuela, and I don't.
You mentioned you're built a certain way to not back down from a fight. What made you that way?
Probably the Dutch Calvinist upbringing.
So your parents,
sure,
your family, and you didn't anticipate that you'd be in this disruptive. You never anticipated what would happen. But you just sort of put one foot in front of the other and built a company and
yeah, exactly. Life is keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Well, you built a pretty huge facility, and you it's sort of that entrepreneurial streak I guess you got from your father.
Yep, sure.
And maybe for people who don't know about that, talk a little about that.
So my dad was born in West Michigan. His dad died when he was 12, so he became the man of the house. And he installed a new hot water heater at 13. Can you imagine a 13-year-old installing a hot water heater today? He was managing a car dealership by 16. Worked 40 hours a week in middle school and high school already, and put himself through college, a couple years in the Air Force, started a business which made die-cast machines, a big machine that squeezes a mold and you make an engine block or a transmission casing for a car. And in the early 70s, patented the lighted sun visor. The guy in the company developed it, and they kind of rode the wave of automotive parts, and it was a fully private company, very successful, serving all the big automakers. And but it was always family policy. My sister Betsy was my oldest sister, and she was working in the factory yard at 16, probably violating child labor laws. But she learned to work. We all learned to work, and it was also family policy that you didn't go to work in the family business. You had to go do something else. And so I never really paid any attention to the business. I went off and joined the Navy and was a SEAL, and was going to do that, and eventually come and work with my dad, but in my 30s. But unfortunately, he died while I was on active duty, and I got out to help sort that all out.
You didn't go fully into the automotive business. You went into this other business. So what led you with your passions with what you've done? It wasn't what your father did.
I'd always been kind of a military history geek, and I read a lot and I traveled a lot. My dad, because he made die-cast machines, the Soviets actually contacted him in the early 70s, and they wanted to buy machines from him. So he actually traveled to Moscow, and he hated it, and he hated the surveillance state and the restriction. And so I remember in 1976, he had shipped a Chevy van to Europe, and we toured around, did a road trip one summer, and I spent my 7th birthday in East Berlin, 1976. And seeing the guns and the dogs and the tank traps and the minefields all facing in, literally keeping people in Berlin prisoner. Keeping people in East Germany prisoner, not allowing to travel or to speak or anything. It was for a 7-year-old, it was even a formative moment.
So you went to East Germany.
Yes, drove through.
Wow.
And Czechoslovakia.
They let you in and out.
There's a tourist corridors you can go through, yes.
And that really had an effect on you politically, philosophically.
Yes. Mm-hmm. How could it not?
Anything else in your adolescence or 20s that really made? Because people always ask me this question: what drives you? What makes you continue doing it? Most people give up or surrender, and you have a passion for what you do, obviously.
You know, I guess my folks always talked about the parable of the talents, and who much is given, much is expected. And my parents were very successful. My dad built a hell of a business, and it gave us the opportunity to travel and to learn and to be curious. And I've been to almost every country on earth, and the United States of America is unique. It is the best place on earth, and it is well worth protecting. It has some really bad spots. It has some really great spots. If we get back to what our founding fathers intended when they built America, it will be something that we want to leave to the next generations. But the more that we allow the left to make us a socialist rotting hell, no way. That is, we must fight to prevent that.
What are you most proud of? Your achievement, or something you achieved overseas, or something particularly that you've done?
Well, look, I have a lot of great kids, and it is wonderful for me to even learn from them. Now, when they refer me to a book, or they help me answer a technical question on phone security, and seeing them prosper is great. And now I'm a granddad. But professionally, I would say I remember speaking at the National War College in Washington, and there was 300 colonels. This was probably 2006. And I got out of the Navy as an 03, as a Navy lieutenant. And all these guys popped to attention as I'd come and speak, and I explained what we were doing with Blackwater. And one of the colonels came up to me afterwards. He said, I just came back from Brigade Command in Baghdad. So he had 4,000 guys that were working for him. And at the top of the dashboards of his Humvees were the Blackwater call signs and frequencies, because his men knew that if they got into a big problem, they'd call Blackwater, they would come right away, no excuses. So building an organization like that with the right kind of people that will run to the sound of the gunfire to help, I was damn proud of that.
And as an entrepreneur, as a businessman, what was the reason for the success? What was the reason? It's tough to build a business. It's tough to find the right people. It's tough to build the right culture of a business. So what was the recipe for success there?
Blackwater was an embodiment of a special operations mindset blended with world-class business discipline. And we really empowered our people. We gave very much mission orders. Go and do this. Not 100 line items of how to do what I needed done. To say, you give people with very high talent and willpower and strength, and you give them flexibility to solve it, they will find a way to win.
And what are you doing now?
Well, the last 3 years we've been developing a phone, because seeing the the nonsense around big tech suppressing free speech, throwing people off of certain platforms, the government actively colluding with big tech to collect people's data, to surveil them, to kind of become the embodiment of an Orwellian hellhole, we decided one of the aspects we have to have is a phone that big tech and big government does not control. And so, this literally started in a rage phone call in January of 2021.
A rage phone call?
It was me talking to a colleague of mine, like, can you believe this shit? I can't believe they're doing this. Let's do something. And so that became the unplugged phone.
The rage was at the ad ID?
The rage was at the state of big government and big tech surveillance and suppression of free speech. And it said a free republic, free people needs an ability to communicate securely and privately with their fellow citizens.
And that phone is the unplugged.
And that's the unplugged phone, yeah. So in 3 years, raised the money, built the team, built the hardware, the operating system, secure messenger, store, a complete phone solution outside of the Google and Apple universe that they cannot control.
You know, people always ask me, what's the catalyst? What's the spark? What's the thing? Because your father was in the automotive industry. You became a Navy SEAL. You did Blackwater, and now this is quite an ambitious project. You're manufacturing.
Yeah, so who wakes up and says, "Yeah, I want to take on two
Yes.
$1 trillion companies"? Someone had to do it, and I certainly don't have the wealth that I even used to have, but I have a stiff neck, and so we've built a great team, and we have a a very capable product that I'm proud to share with the rest of America.
And it's taken you a couple years to get this going.
Yeah, 2.5 years from zero to fully working saleable phone with our own Messenger VPN store. This is something you can replace your Google running Android or your iPhone.
And why should they replace their
The biggest difference is your Google or your Apple phone is built to collect, harvest, and sell all of your personal data. Each of those phones, okay, not an unplugged phone, but the existing paradigm, has an advertising ID, which is like a 25-digit alphanumeric, almost like a mark of the beast, and it follows you everywhere. And
I'm not sure people even know this, but continue.
Well, we'll be doing more and more educational stuff as to just how to attain privacy and security. Because unplugged phone, a phone is a key part of it, but there's also some discipline that comes with it. But that advertising ID, 25 or so alphanumeric unique identifier, they know your phone maker, not even the phone company that's your data service, the phone maker collects where you go, what you buy, who you call, and what you browse. And that information is collected and sold to advertisers. Second, any app that's sitting on your phone works with that advertising ID to extract more data, to the point of turning on a microphone, turning on your camera, turning on your GPS, not necessarily with your consent. Yes, you consented to it when you bought that phone, you scrolled through that user agreement that nobody reads, but they basically say, yeah, we're collecting all your stuff and, stuff it.
So they collect, they turn on the microphone in order to sell
in terms of collect personal information on you so they can better advertise products to you.
So you're taking on the phone industry and also the companies that are advertising. You're taking on quite a Goliath.
Well, I've had so many people that I've talked to that say, yes, I was talking to my wife, not searching, not sending a message, talking to my wife in our bedroom about the need for a new mattress. And the next day they're getting advertising for new mattresses. How frightening is that? That your phone is listening to your dialogue with your spouse. What else is your phone listening to? So again, our phone with our operating system prevents that kind of collection because it prevents those apps from turning on your microphone or your camera or your GPS or your browser. This is actually, it's the first phone with a hard-off firewall settings that you can shut off Bluetooth or touch to pay or Wi-Fi or the camera or the GPS so that you're in control of it. The phone even has a kill switch.
A kill switch?
A kill switch, so that when you slide it over, you separate the battery from the electronics so that off is off. Because when you shut your phone off now, it's not really off. It's still pinging towers, it's still pinging Wi-Fi, building a digital breadcrumb trail. That's how you can still find your phone, even when the phone is off. It's because it's not really off. This allows it to be actually off.
So you can wipe the phone too, I believe.
Yeah, so if we have a secure messenger, and if someone says, I'm here to inspect your phone, and there's a code you can unlock it with, which will wipe the messenger, and you can even wipe the entire phone and brick it. So again, free people, free society requires free and open and secure communications. And I think the pendulum of big government and big tech has gone way too far in one direction, and this phone is to swing the pendulum back in the other direction, come what may, because free people need to be able to communicate securely and freely. And
we're going to do a whole segment on this phone, but the phone, is it for sale now?
Yes, you can order at unplugged.com. We've got 10,000 units coming in next month, and hopefully that will fill our inventory, and then we can deliver next day.
When are they being shipped out? The day after they're delivered?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be April or so.
Yep.
You're getting 10,000 units. A lot of questions about this phone. It was featured in the investigation with the Pentagon guy, and kind of wrapping all this up here. I mean, what is your future? I mean, for Erik Prince, you're still a relatively young guy. Is the
well,
phone?
James, I just came back from a ski trip, and I was backcountry skiing in sleeping at almost 12,000 feet, and I got my ass kicked. So I'm definitely feeling older.
You're feeling older. I mean, I'm 39, and I feel like I'm 99 sometimes. So I understand going through what we've been through. But what is your ultimate, I guess, what is, if you look into the future, is this phone going to be your legacy? Is this what you're really focused on?
No, I think my kids are my legacy, but I want my kids to, you know, I guess I became aware of all these things in the 80s as a kid. So I was born in '69. I remember when Reagan was elected, America was a fantastic country in the 80s. And it was, the economy was growing, moods were up, there was no major stress and conflagration, and I want my kids to inherit an America like that.
I'm really concerned about how our every move in communication is being tracked by our phone. I know a lot about electronic security and cyber threats that we all face every day. And one of those things I know for sure is that the smartphone you're likely using is being listened to and tracked 24/7. They can see our text and emails, they know where we go, they know who we call, which apps we use, and what we buy and what we browse. And by having an ad ID running on our phone, the apps we are using are constantly gathering and storing our personal information and using it to monitor us and monetize our data. We thought our phone was the product, but the reality is the product is us, and our personal information is the product. And by the way, even when we think our phone is off, it's still listening.
I could see your lips move.
I'm excited to announce that the days of our phones harvesting our personal private information for the benefit of big tech and big government ends right now. Our friend Erik Prince, retired Navy SEAL, founder of Blackwater, has developed a new smartphone called Unplugged. Unplugged is built with a totally independent operating system that is absolutely secure. No tracking us on apps. Every call and text is end-to-end encrypted. They can't listen in or follow our online activity. And if we're ever under threat, we can enter a code and our data is totally wiped. And I love that it has the camera, speed, storage, and chipset that rival the iPhone and Android. If you're like me, I've had it with all of my personal and private information being exposed and exploited by big tech and big government. So I'm joining my friend Erik Prince, and I'm switching to my new Unplugged phone, and I'm going to tell you how you can too. So write this down. To protect your privacy and get your very own Unplugged phone, go to unplugged.com/OMG. That's unplugged.com/OMG. Take your privacy back, unplugged.com/OMG.